Hello and welcome everyone. Here we are, we're back for some modern... No, we're not. I don't know why I started off with that intro. We're back here to talk about some stuff involving Magic the Gathering. Now, for those of you who don't know and are new to the game, there are some dialects or choices of words that are not standard amongst all Magic the Gathering players, but tend to be pretty common amongst some. That being said, obviously, if you play in smaller groups away from like the greater, larger, like Magic scene, like if you're not connected amongst Twitter or TikTok or YouTube, you may not understand some of these naming themes. For example, you may hear terms like enemy colored, allied colored. You may hear terms like Azorius, Dimir, or Jund, or Jeskai, or Esper, things like this. You may hear these names and you may have no idea what we're talking about at all. So I'm going to try to clear those up for you today. So with that being said, we're going to hop right in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this card up. This is a Magic the Gathering card back. I'm sure most of you know what that looks like. But I also have this display window open over here for MTGO. It has a different Magic card back, which, I mean, that's not a real card back. But this is going to help me go over it. So we're going to start with what exactly is an enemy or an allied colored. What does that mean? So when you take your Magic card back, you see at the top you have the white pip, then you have blue, then you have black, then you have red, then you have green, circling around like that. Now, allies are those that are standing next to each other. So for example, let's say we're white. That means we have green and blue as our allies. So white plus green, that's an ally color. White and blue are ally colors. For blue, it's black and white. For black, it's red and blue. For red, it's green and black. For green, it's red and white. Now, okay, that's pretty straightforward, right? Now you're probably thinking, well, what is an enemy color then? Well, an enemy color would be those away from it. For example, white's enemy colors are black and red because they're not next to white. Blue's enemy colors would be green and red. To where black's enemy colors are green and white, and red's enemy colors are white and blue. And of course, greens are black and blue. So that's how that's broken up. Pretty straightforward. If they're next to them, they're allies. If they're across from them, they're enemies. Pretty straightforward. Now, this is a nice little baseline because you'll hear people talk about enemy-colored fetches, allied color fetches, the enemy-colored dual lands, allied colored dual lands. Especially when they talk about a cycle of cards, like the land-based cycles. Like, for example, now currently in Standard, you have part of the Pain lands, which is Shivan Reef, Carplusian Forest, all those cards. When they're missing a couple of the set right now, but originally when they were printed in sections of enemy and allied. At least I believe originally. So that's how I've been playing. They've always been printed as enemy or ally separately in sets. Another good example of this is, which we're going to get to later on, but the Triomes in Ikora were one cycle of lands, and then they printed the other cycle in New Capenna, that being the ones that are on screen right now: Jetmir's Garden, Rafine's Tower, Spara's Headquarters, Xander's Lounge, and Zeatora's Proving Ground. So that's like a cycle of cards, right? Is a full set of those cards. Another example of a cycle would be the Shocklands. For those of you who know what these are, those are Hallowed Fountain, Polluted Delta, or not Polluted Delta, Watery Grave, Steam Vents, those lands. A full cycle would be all 10 of them. Most lands end up having a cycle of lands. Of course, there are still some lands that don't have a full cycle yet. For example, the lands from Battle for Zendikar, the one like Canopy Vista, those don't have one. And then the cycling lands from Amonkhet, I don't believe we've ever gotten those. So, of course, like the enemy shock or enemy fetch lands are, of course, Scalding Tarn, Misty Rainforest, Marsh Flats, Verdant Catacombs, and then Arid Mesa. Which would imply that the allies are Floodstrand, Polluted Delta, Bloodstained Mire, Windswept Heath, and Wooded Foothills. I just forgot what they're called for a second. So that is part one out of the way. That gets out of that way. Now we're going to be on to what do Azorius and that stuff mean? Well, there was a block called Ravnica. The original Ravnica block introduced us to 10 different guilds. Now these guilds were essentially just factions living amongst this giant city plane, all having their own ideas or plots or schemes or whatever you want to call it. Each of those guilds had basically like from my understanding, it was essentially like a base of operations. And each guild had a gate showing off the entrances to those guilds. And that's where, of course, these clans came from. But, so each guild had their own little like home base. And that's why now, because of that naming theme, when we name a deck, a lot of times people will call it blank control. So, for example, we have Azorius Guildgate. So when it's blue-white control, a lot of people also call that Azorius control. Blue-black being Dimir, a lot of people will call that Dimir control or blue-black control. For example, we just played a video for this week sometime that's playing Sheoldred, Ledger Shredder, and I called it Dimir control because blue-black control. We have Gruul. One of our opponents in that video was playing a green-red deck, which we would normally call Gruul aggro. Or Gruul whatever. And so that's what that deck was Gruul, because it's red and green. Selesnya, same thing. Simic, same thing. Orzhov, same thing. All those the same thing. That's where we got the naming themes for those cards. Now, not super complicated. As you see right here, I have it split up between allied and enemy lands. It's not super complicated. But of course, if you're not playing during the Ravnica sets, which now, you know, if you're an active player now, the odds are you probably have played through. Unless you're a really new player, you probably played through a Ravnica set because we've had Ravnica, Return to Ravnica, and then this most recent Ravnica set that ended with War of the Spark. We've had all three of those Ravnica blocks. We will probably return to Ravnica sooner than we'd like. But yeah. So those are those. Now, the next ones we're going to get into are... We're going to start getting into the tricolor decks, or tricolor names. Now, the first time we're introduced, or the first time I believe we're introduced, to my knowledge, I couldn't find a case beforehand, but I could be wrong. First time we're introduced to the tricolor factions with a name that's not associated with just a single creature is in the Shards of Alara block. This is, of course, Shards of Alara, Conflux, and Alara Reborn, I believe are the sets to it. In those sets, we were introduced to 5 different, basically mini planes across Alara. These were the shards, the individual blocks, or individual factions, basically. On there, we had, of course, Jund, which is green, red, and black. As you guys will see it a lot, there's a lot of Jund decks on the channel, and that's what the naming is for, is Jund was originally the Jund Shard, which was where green, black, and red creatures were found. Next up is Grixis. This is, of course, one of my favorite color combinations, and one we played also on the channel a lot. It is blue, black, and red. Again, I'm not trying to do this to explain the meanings of the colors and the meanings of the factions they originally were, just where they came from. So remember, Island, Swamp, Mountain, blue, black, red. That is Grixis. And then we have green, white, and blue, which is Bance. That's what everyone called it there because that's what the name of that set or that name of that grouping was. Then Rafine's Tower represents our Esper, which was originally the name of the first group that was associated with that color scheme, blue, black, and white. Ooh, sorry about that, guys. And then finally the last one, which was red, white, and green, and that is Naya. So those were the shards block names and groupings. Super iconic. Still to this day, people refer to them as that name. It is the easiest to shortcut decks into Grixis control, blah, 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 Bant, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Jund, I mean, Jund is synonymous now with the Tarmogoyf, Liliana, Thoughtseize, that type of deck. And its name started back on Shards of Alara, when there was a Jund deck in Standard that was playing stuff like Bloodbraid and Sprouting Thanax, Bitumus Blast, Putrid Leech, a whole bunch of weird cards that nowadays would be wild to see played, but back then were pretty good cards. One of the best decks in the format. Then, quite a few years later, we would go to a plane called Tarkir. Now, in Tarkir, there were 5, I think there were clans. These 5 clans in the first set lived on the plane and went about their normal daily business. On Tarkir, these dragons also existed. That's a whole other story. Not really getting into that. But each of these individual groups initially appeared, and we got names for the other set. Because leading up to that, we didn't really have a name for them. We just tried to call them by their color combinations. So we had blue, white, red. We called it America. American Control, America Tempo, whatever. You had green, black, and white, which we called Junk. Don't know why people called it Junk, but that's what it was called. I remember one of my favorite decks I ever played was a Junk Super Friends list back when the first Innistrad block was still around. We had Rug, which was red, blue, and green. Rug Control with Jace, the Mind Sculptor, and stuff like that was one of the biggest decks around for a while after Caw-Blade. Anyone that's playing around that time remembers that, I'm sure. So there was those names that we just didn't have a whole lot of names. You know, we just didn't have real good names for them, so we just gave them the names we thought we could have, or that thought that worked. There was no red, white, and black name that I knew of, and there was definitely no blue, green. Bug. Bug was blue, green, black, blue, green. That's right. Bug, because black B, blue U, green G. So of course Bug was the other one. I forgot Rug and Bug, America, and Junk, and then I don't think there was one for red, white, and black. But of course those all were the names that we just gave them and called them, and that was the shorthand that everyone, or at least everyone I knew of and everyone we played around, understood. Even when it was bigger tournaments like LA area, people understood the wording, and it was something that existed amongst the Magic community. Now, again, fast forward back to Khans of Tarkir, we're introduced to 4 new clans. These clans were the blue, black, and green clan for Sultai, which was interesting. I was not a big fan of that name in the beginning. I thought it was very strange. I liked Bug a lot better than that. And I still periodically call it Bug. But Sultai was easy enough to remember, and it was pretty interesting. Then we had Rug, which now became Teamer, which was super strange, but that one I think grew on me the fastest. Blue, green, red, of course, is Teamer. You'll see like we have Teamer Scapeshift, Teamer Iteration. That's because they're blue, red, and green decks. Next up was, of course, black, white, and green. This one originally being Junk, now became Abzan. Abzan, to me, was a nice name for it. I thought that was the best one initially, and it didn't really need to grow on me. I liked it. I thought it was cool. That was better than Junk, because Junk just was like, it felt nostalgic to say it, and still does, but it didn't make sense. One of my buddies explained to me that it's called junk because those color combinations typically create nothing but junk decks, um, or janky decks, but junk is as close to jank as you're going to get. Uh, but yeah, so Abzan, pretty sweet. Then our America colors became Jeskai. Blue, red, and white is Jeskai now. You see that in control decks, things like that. And finally, the one that we did not have a name for at all became Mardu. Red, white, and black now is known as Mardu, and that's the color combination everyone calls it. Now, for years after this, we stuck with these naming themes. Admittedly, while the guild names did come in and out of favor, they mostly were around for the period of time that I played Magic. However, they were primarily used during the spans that we were in Ravnica or just out of Ravnica. People tried to avoid using them in our local game store because it confused people on what's Azorius. Well, then you had to explain why it's called that and all that stuff, and it was a long, long-winded story, because just, that's a guild from Ravnica that happens to be those colors. That's why we call these the colors. Now, I'm sure you've probably noticed, despite the fact that we have now a new set of lands and new set of groups in the Magic multiverse representing these tricolors, why do we still call them their old versions instead of calling them by their names like they are here? For example, like all these are named after the leaders of the families from New Capenna. Why don't we call ourselves by the New Capenna factions? Like Cabaretti, Obscura, Brokers, Maestros, and Riveteers. Why don't we call those now? And the reason is because we already have existing names. At least this is my theory on why. I guess there's no real deliberate answer. So my theory is we already have names that are synonymous and well known amongst the community. Most websites you see use the original names, being Jund, Naya, Bant, Esper, Grixis, as opposed to using these new ones. That's the same reason why when these lines first came out, I made comments about, I don't know why they didn't name them Triomes, and I just called them literally Jund Triome, Grixis Triome, Bant Triome, Esper Triome, Naya Triome. It's because we already had a nice naming theme with Triomes. I don't know why we didn't just continue that. Even though I do understand narratively why we didn't just go back with Grixis and Jund, because those were from a plane. They were not just names given outside like America, Bug, Rug, Junk. No, they were real names from factions inside the lore of the game. We already had better names. We already had good, rounded names, and, I mean, come on, they're not even on their main lands. So why would we go with that? The same thing goes for the factions or clans from Ikora. That's why we don't call Mardu Savai now. We don't call Jeskai Rugrin. We don't call Abzan Indatha. We don't call Timur Ketria. And we definitely don't call Sultai Zagotha. Or Zagoth. The original names are just easier, more simple to remember. Most of the player base already knows them and uses them regularly. Most websites use them. It's so much easier. And I think that's the only reason why we stick with those names, is because they're just easier. We've had them around. We know what they are. We've known how to use them. They're not complicated. So, yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you guys think we should start calling them just whatever the newest cycle of cards that go into that faction are? Should they be Savai now instead of Mardu? Should it be, Maestros instead of Grixis, or Maestro Control instead of Grixis Control? Like, is that what we should do? Or let me know if you think we should do something else. Like, should we have named them after the most notable dragons? Like, should Esper be Chromium? Because Chromium is one of the most known Elder Dragons for that color. Should we go with, naming after the Khans of Tarkir and after the Strixhaven dragons for the colors now for the instead of guilds. Should we go with those? Should we go with Kolaghan is black red? Should we go with Salumgar is blue black? What should we do? Should we name Grixis after Bolus? Should Grixis be Bolus controlled? Just that's the color now. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. I hope this helped it out, guys. I had a couple people message me on Twitter saying they might be interested in this kind of video just because they don't understand all the naming themes that people give. I guess we should cover one more. So when people say Wooburg, the reason they call it Wooburg is because when you have a 5-color card, let's say when you have a card that's Wooburg, the reason that 5-color is called Wooburg is because W for white, U for blue, B for black, R for red, G for green. Wooburg. See what I mean? So that's not super important, but I think it is notable enough to remind everyone and let everyone know why it's called that. Do I think that's super important? No, I don't think Wooburg is an important name to call it. I just usually call 5 colors. So they look like the 4-color groups. You couldn't call them after their initial commander card that gave that colored specifically names. I see people name them after the what are they called? The glint eye things or whatever from the original Ravnica block. It's not really important, I don't think, but I've just seen different things. So I do personally think that Wooburg is pointless, but I do like the other tricolor and dual color namings. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.